My name is Maria Fiorito, and my independent project focuses on German pedagogue and education reformer Fredrich Froebel and his influences on progressive education reform, modern kindergarten, and artists and craftsmen of the 20th century. Fredrich Froebel was a German pedagogue best known as the founder of the kindergarten movement and one of the most influential educational reformers of the 19th century. This early childhood pedagogy, known as kindergarten, was first termed as such by Froebel to mean garden of children, in which the children were the plants whose human and spiritual development should be nurtured through a natural but logical sequence of voluntary self-activity learning, or play, with the use of object toys known as gifts and occupations. The aim was not to transmit knowledge, but to direct outwardly an individual's human potential and to understand the inner relationship of things, by which would come the meaning of nature, man, God, and their unity. This child-centered pedagogy spread through Germany and Europe, finally sowing its seeds to be fostered and amended by progressive leaders like John Dewey and G. Stanley Hall, while remaining as the initial building blocks of early progressive education. Froebel's influence would leave an immense impact on American education and culture as it stands today. The kindergarten system can also be recognized in child-centered education systems and within the foundations of other Froebelian departures such as Montessori and Waldorf. Much like America's educational Reformation movement, Europe was experiencing a Reformation of their own. Beginning much earlier than America, 18th century Europe had begun to embrace the idea of public education, making primary education compulsory in most major cities, and driving education reformers like Swiss pedagogue Johann Pestalozzi, German philosopher Immanuel Kant, and Froebel to promote their theories on the matter. Froebel himself was inspired by Pestalozzi and Kant, and in turn adopted the basic principles of the pedagogy's theories. Froebel further expanded his philosophy by applying the scientific theories of crystallography, which he had learned under Samuel Weiss at a university in Germany. In 1826, Froebel published The Education of Man, a discourse relating to childhood education that illustrates the fundamental principles his now infamous kindergarten is based on. He decided to put his methods and theories into practice by opening the first of his schools in Killau in Bad Blankenburg, Prussia, in 1837. This school he named the Child Nurture and Activity Institute, which he would later rename as the Universal German Kindergarten, coining this term kindergarten, or garden of children, to represent his early childhood education philosophy. Kindergartens began to spread throughout Prussia, and, despite a governmental ban in 1851, at least 70 more would be established in cities throughout the German nation. Froebel's kindergarten had spread throughout Europe, making its way to America by means of German kindergarten educator Margaret Meyer-Schurz. After Schurz and her older sister, Bertha, met Fredrich Froebel in London, Bertha had opened England infant garden, which education practice followed Froebel's pedagogy. Margaret taught at the school, later relocating to the United States with her husband Karl Schurz and bringing Froebel's pedagogy with them. In 1856, Schurz opened the Watertown Kindergarten in Watertown, Wisconsin, the first German-speaking kindergarten in the United States. Other German-speaking kindergartens would pop up in more states by Froebelian German pedagogues, but it wasn't until American-born Elizabeth Peabody that the first English-speaking kindergarten began to take hold in American educational systems. Printer and educator, Peabody is known as America's foremost promoter of Froebelian kindergarten. After learning of Froebel's methods through Margaret Schurz on one of her political trips, she was determined to advance Froebel's philosophy throughout the country by opening the first formal kindergarten in Boston and the nation. In 1857, she visited Germany to further educate herself on Froebel's pedagogy. Her widespread promotion through curriculum demonstration, lectures, and essays would implement kindergarten into conventional American education. In 1879, Philadelphia centennial exhibition, Peabody would demonstrate to the nation and internationally Froebel's methods. The intent of the World's Fair was to showcase new domestic and international developments and achievements, and among international kindergarten displays, Elizabeth Peabody and other Froebel leading women like Miss E.M. Coe and Miss Blau displayed to the nation their American Froebel system establishments by teaching children in their erected small buildings, claiming the interest of everyone. This successful undertaking showed the unassuming public of the possibilities of kindergarten integration in public schools. As the 19th century came to a close, there were many other education reformers who contributed to the many changes within American education system. Among these were American philosopher and educator John Dewey. Froebel's philosophy of early childhood education did not go unnoticed by and had tremendous influence on early progressive reformers of the late 19th and early 20th century. German pediatrician and educator Joseph Mayer Rice and psychologist G. Stanley Hall left their impact on the system as well, but John Dewey made an impressive imprint, becoming known as the father of progressive education and leaving his mark on contemporary education. We can see his learning methods still being used in today's classrooms. Not unlike Froebel, Dewey was a supporter of the child-centered approach and believed in human potential liberation through learning by doing or by pragmatic means. Like Froebel as well, he believed in the teacher adapting to each child's learning ability. Dewey further added to Froebel's philosophy, theorizing that children could not achieve optimum learning unless interacting with their environment. He placed importance on creating connections between what is being learned and real-world application, and that learning was not a means to an end, but a continuous activity for holistic development. Froebel's influences on Dewey's theories are considerable, and although Dewey's progressive theories contain in their foundation Froebelian philosophy, Dewey's pedagogy has eclipsed that of his influencer. The promotion of his educational methodology and theory during an accelerating and established education system ready for change found easier integration within mid-20th century progressive views, and thus easily remains in modern education views. Not long after John Dewey's book School and Society in 1899 was published, an Italian physician and educator by the name of Maria Montessori was developing her own educational approach. Montessori and Froebel shared the belief in developing the child's spiritual nature, with emphasis placed on the inherent desire for exploration of the gifts and occupations offered within a stimulating environment, as well as completing each stage of child development successfully and thoroughly. Where Montessori deviates from Froebel philosophy is in her intent and practice. Relating to G. Stanley Hall's philosophy that pedagogy should be founded on science and research, Montessori based her educational research on her own observations of children and their natural relationship to a prepared environment, work, and directed lessons. The prepared environment was crucial for self-activity, as was the careful intervention of the teacher to mold the child's soul without interrupting spontaneous activity. This self-motivating activity, which Froebel defined as play for learning, was instead employed by Montessori as a method to become normalized through work rather than play. Montessori's more objective approach to using material for its intended purpose rather than its remaining free for imaginative manipulation was also a radical departure to Froebelian philosophy. The Montessori method of child education development had begun to grow in the early 20th century, losing fervor mid-century, only to revive again in the 60s, and continues today to remain a popular option in contemporary education as a choice school offered to parents. Another outgrowth that should give credit to Froebelian philosophy is the Walden school system, which is a derivative of Montessori education. Having studied child education with Maria Montessori, Margaret Naumburg opened her own private and independent Montessori school in New York, the first in the United States. Named the Children's School, it too had a focus on child development, but as Naumburg began to shift from Montessori philosophy toward an even more child-centered one, she left the school shortly after to establish the Walden School in Manhattan. Hoping to implement her own innovative philosophies founded on Freud's and Dewey's theories, she aimed to encourage creative activity and expression and foster individuality through self-motivated learning. that individualism was more important than group consciousness, and that competition was minimalized with no standardized exams, was a progressive stance which placed the Walden School as a leader in the movement. The Walden School operated from 1914 to 1988, merging with the new Lincoln School and then closing its doors in 1991. Froebel's pedagogical influence did not find its significance solely affixed to educational reform, but it had found its way into the minds of 20th century eminent artists and architects, particularly that of architect Frank Lloyd Wright and modernist artists Mondrian, Klein, and Kandinsky. The science of crystallography and Froebel's theories run parallel with each other, Froebel having applied these scientific principles to his theories of human development. They both are believed to develop outward from within, striving to maintain balance between inner and outer forces, essentially the same developmental formula, to which Frank Lloyd Wright would later say the same for the base of his architecture. Froebel's occupations, which are meant for children in a later stage of their childhood, roughly 10 years old, had distinct effects on these artists, notably architect Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright often expressed in his autobiography and was noted in other writings the inspiration that he had received with the manipulation of these occupations. The inception of his Froebelian learning was provided by his mother. She had purchased a set of Froebel blocks from the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. Wright distinctly remembers the smooth, shapely maple blocks with which to build, the sense of which never afterwards have left the fingers, so form became feeling. These primary forms were the secret of all effects. Upon observing many of Wright's architectural floor plans, one can see they unmistakably mirror the Froebelian geometric forms created by young children manipulating one of Froebel's stripped paper occupations. As Wright had once mentioned, he had worked in his kindergarten days with strips of colored paper of different textures, which could be freely constructed to his pleasure, creating forms such as windmills or clovers. Of Wright's floor plans, these patterns, identical to Froebel's forms, are rearranged upon a basic ground form, can be rotated on an axis to develop or expand his architectural floor plans. These geometric shapes can be observed in the works of other artists as well, especially by those who were also kindergarten students, such as Klein and Kandinsky, and Mondrian and Itten, who were elementary school teachers, most likely familiar with Froebel's pedagogical methods. The geometrical aspects within the pedagogy have clear links to these great works. In closing, the magnitude of Froebel's theoretical framework may be lost to our contemporary vision through the radical progressive advance of his admirers, but upon the re-examination of the progressive movement origins and uncovering their hidden roots, we can see a foundation strengthened by Fredrich Froebel philosophy, and that without his progressive philosophical explorations and invention of the kindergarten in Europe, our American education would not be as democratic or successful as it is today.